Welcome everyone to today's CUGC Connect. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I am with CUGC HQ, and I am so happy to welcome you to today's webinar with FSLogix and Dave Young. We'll be talking all about application masking, so that's going to be exciting. We'll have a presentation followed by a demo, and you will also have an opportunity to ask questions, so be sure to type those into the question area of the control panel as you think of them. Moderating today is Jo Harder. Jo is a CUGC Women in Tech mentor. She is the leader of the Tampa CUGC group, and she is a CTP. And on that note, I would also like to give special notice on FSLogix, thank them for being a sponsor of CUGC's Women in Tech mentoring program. We're so excited to have them on board with that this year. And Jo, would you like to say hello really quickly before we move on?
Sure. Hello, everyone. And Stephanie, you stole my thunder. I was going to give a shout out to FSLogix for Women in Tech and what they're doing for the program. Not only is FSLogix a supporter of Women in Tech for CUGC, but they're a fabulous supporter for CUGC overall. So thank you to FSLogix, and I am looking forward to being your moderator today.
Awesome. All right, so without further ado, I am going to pass things over to Dave Young to get us started. Dave, I am sending you the screen right now, and Dave is going to kick us off and tell us who else he has on the call with us today. Here you go, Dave.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much. I'm very, very fortunate today. Hopefully my screen is showing, and I'm going to make everything large. There we go. We'll try and make everything large. There we go. Yes. So I'm very, very fortunate today. You know, we're talking about women in tech. I am on the phone today with Jo Harder, who is a very smart woman. Got Stephanie on the phone. I also brought along Cassondra McAllister. Cassondra is our expert when it comes to masking. She's an expert at a lot of things, but if there's anything to be asked around masking, we're going to have Cassondra on. I'm going to give a quick presentation, then we're going to dig into the demo and Q&A specifically around masking. We'll answer questions around anything, but we really want to dig deep and leave as much time for masking. So very, very fortunate today. I am a firm believer of women in tech. You can ask some of the women I've worked with in the past thing to bring a different thought process to the game. So all good stuff. So let's get into the stuff and kind of talk about who is FSLogix, what is our customer base, what are we limited to, et cetera, et cetera. So we got customers all over the place. We originally had a lot of attention in the healthcare space. We had Emory and a couple other healthcare providers that thought what we were doing. And then the banks fell in love with us and liked what we were doing. And we're ultimately all over the place, right? There's not a specific use case or vertical that is important to us. You know, you see we're partners with Microsoft, Citrix, and VMware. We try to maintain the only limiting factor that we have is the Windows OS. The hypervisors, the brokers really don't matter to us. So as you start to think about that, it makes it a nice all-round solution. So some of the testimonials that are out in the industry, these are guys that I have been working with forever. I've been in the EUC space since about 2002, 2001. I had a problem. It was a Java problem, go figure. And the solution to that was we did DNS-based PC Anywhere into the data center. And I kind of laugh about that because we've come so far, right? However, that was my first VDI deployment. And these guys in the industry are great fans of ours. I've been on the not-so-great fan list at a company once before. And it's good to have these guys liking what we're doing and getting how we're changing what's going on in the EUC space. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about. FSLogix has 4 products, okay? It's our Office 365 containers, our profile containers, our Java conflict management tool, and our application masking. And we're going to go through those topics today, and at the end of this, we'll do the demo on app masking so we can dig pretty deep in there. Those modules can be bought in their entirety, or as a single solution. So let's say you're very, very happy with your profile solution and you decide you have an Office 365 problem, you can buy just that piece. You're very happy with those two solutions that you have and you want to buy App Masking, you can buy just that piece. So you're not tied to one or all, you can actually interchange them as desired. So out of today's session, the most important thing I want everybody to get is if the user experience is not better than what they had before, your end user is not happy, okay? And as we look at taking physical objects away from people and moving them into the VDI space, we need to do everything that we can to make that experience better. And it's not just VDI, it can be, RDSH/Zen App, it doesn't matter, as long as we're looking at making the overall solution better. And one of the big pain points is Office 365 in that solution. So I want to talk about what the industry has been doing and how we got where we are. So roughly 10 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long, VDI started really taking off, right? And one of the problems that we were faced with is trying to separate the computer from the hardware. That was easy. The brokers, or excuse me, the virtualization layers figured that out for us. But then once we had the computer, the operating system, breaking apart the user's profile, applications, and data into separate blobs. And if you ever Google me when I was back at VMware many, many years ago, you'll hear that I talk about blob computing, breaking about the blob, right? And separating those core components. Well, at the time, as we separated them, ultimately what we were doing is putting those components into a file share and building them into the OS just in time. And albeit it worked well, it didn't scale well. And that is ultimately what FSLogix is looking at addressing when it comes to our profiles and ODFC stuff. How do we make that portion scale reliably so that my performance is good? I remember sitting and talking to people saying, oh yeah, you're going to need X number of IOPS per user. And ultimately the reason I needed so many IOPS was because I was building out this stuff and I was copying data back and forth. And as we look at that copying the data back and forth, that really impacts what we're doing when it comes to Office 365, right? So if you don't have an Office 365 problem today, trust me, you will soon, okay? As Office 365 goes further into mainstream, more adopters happen. What happens is on the physical layer, nobody thinks about it. It's not a big deal. It's good. We can run cache, et cetera, et cetera. But then when we come to the virtual, VDI, XenApp, all that stuff, it starts to cause us a problem. And the ultimate problem that we have is that the performance is not what we want. So if I put an OST out on the LAN, okay, or on a LAN link for storage, what happens is all those operations take longer. If you're familiar with how fetch and retrieve, as I call it, or SIFS works, SMB works, ultimately you're talking at a file level. And when you're talking to a file that is several gig in size, that performance is not what we want it to be, right? So it causes delays in read-write operations, performance timeouts on the client operations. They only have so long to do those, and ultimately it causes a bad experience. So as we start to look at our solutions, what we want to do is think about how do containers play into the realm of things. I tell everybody I got two types of customers. The customer that does their homework and knows what they're getting into, so when the problem comes to them, they have a response, and the customer that has an uh-oh moment. And as we think about that, we want to make sure, and hopefully that's why you're listening today, is to avoid that uh-oh moment. So we were the first container-based solution. We provide real-time performance, okay? We don't care what the published desktop is, as long as it's Windows 7 and higher, Windows 2012 and higher. Doesn't matter to us. And, you know, we talk a lot about Office 365, but in all reality, it could be Office 2010, 2013, 2016. It could be Google Mail. It doesn't matter to us. I even got a customer that had on-site Exchange. The Exchange servers were just dying, and what they wanted to do is use caching so they could alleviate some of the load on the Exchange servers, and they utilized us for that, right? So it doesn't have to be a quote-unquote Office 365 migration, but that's generally where we see people getting into trouble. So One big thing, this is really important, even Microsoft recommends FSLogix for search and non-persistent environments. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And for OSTs, they actually commissioned a study by RDS gurus who went out and analyzed this and found that, yes, we met the things that we were bragging about. Now, in all fair disclosure, after completing that study, Dr. Benny Tritsch was so interested in what had happened, he actually came on to help build our German market for FSLogix. So kind of, you know, a good point for him where he actually saw it working, validated that it works as said, and then pursued trying to get hired by us, and we did hire him. So a couple other things. Office 365 is not all about mail. OneDrive starts to come too, and we also address that problem. So as it starts to come at you, usually it mails first and data is second. So just keep in mind, we've got some great articles that you can read to talk about how we address that, but ultimately it just works. We intercept the locations for OneDrive, put them into a container, and allow that to just function. So how are we different? What are we doing different? So instead of saying, take a path and go put it out in a folder share and mount that OST remotely, what we're doing is we're intercepting the actual data path. So as you start to dig in here and see what's going on, we're intercepting App Data Local, Microsoft Outlook, also OneDrive, also Skype for Business, a global address book, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, we're just intercepting that, creating a fancy junction, and putting that into a VHD. And when the user logs in, we match all that stuff up, make sure that the environment is prepared, and allow them to continue logging in and have their data in a VHD out on a common file share that they can connect to from, you know, VDI machine 1 through 100 or XenApp server 1 through 100. Doesn't matter to us. So we put that data into a container and it behaves just as normal. The most important thing I tell people is we do not change the behavior of Outlook, meaning there's no modifications to Outlook. We change the behavior to the disk storage location. So as we think about that, that means that we're not modifying what you're doing within Outlook. We're only changing how the storage is presented to the application. So couple of conversations around limitations around XenApp right now. General best practice in the industry for the last, I think, 15 years has been, maybe more, has been to disable search. Okay. Ultimately, that was so that we could get the maximum performance that we needed, and that's because the search database is a computer-based object, not a user-based object. And if I go from one XenApp server, what happens is I have to rebuild my index, and that costs us a lot of CPU cycles when we start to look at what's going on there. So our other answer is use instant build. Okay, instant build has a very unpredictable user experience. Okay, it's heavy on the network, it's heavy on your services, it's going to hit your CPU pretty significantly. If you actually take a look at what's going on, I thought I had the next slide that showed that, it ultimately hammers your CPU. If you type a search in and you leave it sitting there, you will see that it will continuously ask the online servers, is the word, I use diamonds are forever for my search terms for demos, is the word diamonds there in anything? And if not, it'll ask again every second, right? And it will eat up a ton of resources. This isn't really a XenApp problem. It's a functionality problem. We've tried to solve some solutions, but ultimately it will impact your reputation on your XenApp infrastructure. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that that user experience is good. And with FSLogix Search on XenApp, what we do is we persist the index to the user. Okay, we are profile solution independent. If all you need to do is provide search back to the masses, you can turn this on and let whatever profile solution you want handle it. You get a much more predictable user experience, and it gives us the ability to get greater density. Okay, because now I'm not having to worry about that instant search or the local search eating up all my resources, rebuilding every time the user comes in. So what it looks like underneath the covers real quick, I have my Outlook folder here on the left, and we connect that to the VHD, the ODFC demo user VHD, and upon doing that, mail just behaves like normal. Configuration is pretty simple. It can be GPOs, it can be GPPs, it could be straight to the registry. Technically, to get us working, you only need 2 keys. It's the location. I don't think you have server 1 share, and turn it on, the enabled key right here. So those are the 2 things. There's a lot of other things that we can do to make your environment behave based off of your user demand, okay? But ultimately, to get this up and running, those 2 keys are necessary. So real quick, what does it look like? You can see here I've got a mail box. It's got 8,500 messages. My mails are in C users, demo user 2, app data local Microsoft Outlook. It's standard path. That path is actually being intercepted. And as we go through here, you'll see that my search has 0 items indexed. I did a search for the keyword USDA, and it found a whole bunch of things, okay? And that all came from the actual local cache that was contained within the VHD. So let's see how many more screenshots. Give me just one moment to advance all these. There we go. So,
hey Dave, before we get into profile containers, can we step back just a moment?
Yep, I was going to take a deep breath. I know I've been talking fast, trying to get everything through. So go ahead, Joe.
Okay, couple of questions and actually a comment. So I was involved with an effort last year taking a look at FSLogix with Office 365. One of the things that I noted, and I want to make sure the audience understands this, is that when you do your initial POC with just a very small number of users, let's say you've got 3 or 5 or 7 users, you're really not going to see a huge difference. Where you are going to see a difference is where you have a multitude of users. So I just want to point that out for those of you that took a look at this, like what you see, and are thinking about testing it. Make sure you try it with lots of users, not just a few.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to add a couple comments to that. Remember I said the uh-oh users, right? They're the ones that got this thrown on them. They went out and did folder redirection or shares for the OST. They got it to roughly about 100, 150 users, and everything starts falling down, right? And they're not only in the uh-oh position, they've already staked their career on this. They're in the I'm about to get fired position, right? Because everybody's upset with how mail is performing, all right? So be very, very cautious as you move down that path. Make sure you test this at scale, okay? I can tell you I was up in Kansas City with Ron Oglesby and somebody else, I'll just leave them anonymous, and we were sitting around a round table talking about this, and a guy said, well, I've got it running perfectly fine. And Ron kind of looked at me and did a double take. He's like, how could they get it running perfectly fine? Ron and I have been in this industry forever, right? We know about performance, right? And Ron decided to dig in. He says, how many users do you have? And the guy's like, 110. Well, yeah, if all you have is 110, you can probably get by, right? If you go beyond that, you're going to really want to make sure that you address it appropriately. So any other comments on that, Joe?
Yeah, there's a question that came in about licensing. So if you're licensed for profiles in Office 365, would you need a separate container for Office 365 in the profile, or could you just store all of it in the profile container?
You can do either or, okay? I personally prefer to store the ODFC data in one container and the profile data in another. And it ultimately comes down to this simple answer. ODFC data is easily recreatable, okay? If my storage has a hiccup, my user has a problem, whatever, and I have to reset them, delete their VHD, their container, it's all going to come back, right? If my profile has a problem, let's just say, and we don't normally see a lot of profile corruption, but let's just say my profile does have a problem and I need to do something for that user, I don't want to delete that profile. That is not easily recreatable data. I want to try to repair it first versus just hit the reset switch. So I personally like to distribute them. Okay. It also gives you the ability, if you need to scale up one server to handle a little more load and scale down the other to handle a little less load, you can do that without having it based on everything. Any other thoughts or comments around that, Joe?
Yeah, there's actually one more question that came in. Before I go to this one, though, I just want to remind everybody, go ahead and put your questions in the questions tab. The next question is, are there any minimum requirements for network and storage? This person said that he's not been able to find any details of that in the product documentation.
You know, that's a very good point. That person actually read our documentation, and we intentionally leave out those requirements. If you read it again, you'll see that we say any Windows compatible share, right? And what do we mean by that, right? Does that mean it has to be a Windows server? No, it could be a CIF server, okay? It could be going directly to your storage. It could be, I've got a customer over in the UK, I never thought anybody would be doing this. It could be a Novell file share, right? It doesn't really matter to us what that is, as long as on login, I can open up Explorer, go whack server name, whack share, and get to that data, okay? So when you think about it from that perspective, we are not necessarily dependent on the technology. It's the Windows client that is dependent on being able to get there.
Okay, there's a couple more questions that have come in, but I know that you've got a lot of materials to cover, so I'm going to delay those until the end. So let you keep going on profile containers.
Short, right? We talked about all the things that we're doing on ODFC. ODFC was actually built around profiles technology, right? I spend the most time talking about ODFC because everybody's got a problem right now with ODFC, right? So we built ODFC based off the profiles technology. We do the same thing. We intercept CUsers percent username and put that into a container, right? It allows us to reduce the amount of folder redirection we're doing. Now, there is going to be some things that you want to do folder redirection for, like my documents. You might want to redirect that because users need to be able to share things, get to things externally, et cetera, right? You might not want to do my downloads, right? It's up to you on what you do in that arena, and you can kind of dial it in as you desire. But ultimately, anytime we reduce the amount of folder redirection, your logins are going to get faster. Okay, because we don't have to process all that folder redirection information. So what are we doing underneath the covers? Same exact thing we did with ODFC. We're intercepting the profile, we're inserting it into a VHD and mounting that early in the login process. Now, before I go on, I want to talk about a couple things on that, right? Not all containers are created equal. And when I say they're not all created equal, if you drop down to a command prompt and do a dir on your container junction, and you can tell it's a container or a junction point or symbolic link, whatever you want to call it, right? You're going to have some longer term problems that you really need to consider, right? Applications like Office in protected mode, right? Adobe Flash, right? Things like this are going to have problems going across those junctions. I don't care how hard you tap on the OneDrive install. I broke a mouse trying to do this once. You go to the install and it's going to a junction, it will not let you hit next. It doesn't matter how hard you hit that mouse, right? It's just not going to let you move forward. So when you think about that, these are all things to think about. Why would you want to do something more advanced than just connect a VHD to the machine and move forward? And that's what our filter driver provides to you. So I'm going to take a deep breath, Joe. Is there any questions around profiles that may have came in or combined with the ODFC stuff?
There's a comment about FSLogix, and this person says that our profiles are located on a 10K NetApp CIF share and the performance is good.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about a little study. I'm all about data. I've been in IT architecture forever, and I use this phrase, use fact and science, not tribal knowledge, right, and guessing, right? So one of the things I did, we have a customer, Holsteboro Commune, and you can get it if you go to our website. We did a project with them, and our marketing guys, everybody knows what architecture is, right? Marketing guy's going to fire a bullet at me if he hears me talking too loud. Our marketing team had went through and done a case study with Holsteboro Commune, and they sent it to me to review. And one of the things I saw in there was that they had 3,400 users. They were running 31,000 IOPS, okay, with UPM. UPM's great technology, does some cool stuff. We can actually work in conjunction with that. But they replaced UPM with FSLogix, and it dropped to 2,500 IOPS. Now, I believe wholeheartedly we reduced the amount of IOPS required, right? It's pure science. When I saw that, I said to the architecture team, I said, 2,500, 31,000 to 2,500. You sure, Europeans use commas in weird places. You sure you didn't mess that up? Maybe it was 31,000 to 25,000. Maybe, there was typo in there. Are you sure? Well, they put me in touch with the customer. I had to eat a lot of crow because guess what? They did go from 31,000 IOPS to 2,500. Now, why? Let's talk about the science behind this. I log in. I put a 4 gig DVD on my desktop, and whether it's roaming profiles or UPM or any other technology, it's literally grabbing that file from the file share, copying it to the desktop. So there's double the I/O right there. And then when we log off, if nothing changed, we do nothing with it. But the next time I log in, I do it over and over and over and over again. With FSLogix, we connect to the disk. Yeah, the 4 gig DVD is sitting on the desktop, but I do nothing with it unless I actually open it, right? And if I open it, I'm just reading enough data to be able to say, hey, here's the contents of Dave's Batman movie, right? We don't need any of it. We're just reading the contents. So it really changes what our behavior is and why we're able to go from 31,000 IOPS to 2,500, okay? Now, in all fair disclosure, I tell everybody plan 5 IOPS. And why do I tell people to plan 5 IOPS? Because behavior of end users is so unpredictable. This is what keeps end user computing employed. If it was predictable, we would have fixed it 20 years ago, right? So that end user experience and what they do is so unpredictable. Go with about 5 IOPS per user and you'll be okay. Okay. So with that, any other questions, Joe?
Let's keep it going, and like I said, we'll summarize a few more at the end.
Awesome. So Java conflict management. I'm going to give you a quick overview of that. Ultimately, the problem is I have multiple versions of Java. Why is it IT's job to go out and say, hey, everybody in the world to our company needs to upgrade to Java version 1.9 because that's what we're safe and secure using, right? And we have all these applications, internal, external, that use different versions of Java. It costs money to redo them, and ultimately IT is trying to maintain security. So with our conflict management tool, what we're able to do is a very simple thing. I support applets and applications. It's automatic. There's no packaging or sequencing. Ultimately, what we do is we go in and we create a rule. So you can see here my first rule was the system folder, app1.exe, and I assigned it Java version 1.5. My second one, app2.exe, I assigned it to Java version 1.7. Anything else that I go to that isn't in these rules will take the highest level of Java. So it gives us a very quick and easy way to map our users, okay, to the appropriate version of Java. So when they go out to the world, they're not using an unsecure version of Java. They're using the appropriate version for the site that I must trust. Any questions there, Joe?
No, I think Java is pretty straightforward, and I think we're seeing fewer and fewer applications having those dependencies, but it's still a problem for some.
It is. I always laugh when somebody goes, we don't have a Java problem. It's getting better, but it's not gone yet. And as we all know, big companies have, very diverse environments, and they have a bigger, schema of problems. So last piece I want to go into is our app masking. And I'm going to, while I'm going into app masking, ask Cassondra to make sure everything's good to go on her end. She's going to be doing the demo. So ultimately, what are we talking about? We're talking about single image management, unified base image management, right? Getting all these different boundaries that I have that create silos, okay? So that I don't have to have a farm that supports Windows 2010, a farm that supports Windows 2013, a farm that supports Adobe Reader, a farm that supports Adobe Pro, a farm that supports Visio, right? We want to get all that stuff into a single image. The only boundary we should technically have, if you take this to the fullest extent of what we can do, is the OS, right? I have a boundary for 2012, a boundary for 2016, okay? So as we start to think about this, this eliminates all those silos, a lot of that complexity. And when we think about it, it actually reclaims a lot of infrastructure, okay? So let's just say I had a server. I'm a large environment, and I have a server to serve up Office. Probably got 10 of them. All my users are doing their thing. But I've got this one-off. I need to serve up Visio for some users. So, Joe, would you ever deploy a single server in production? Probably not, right? That's dangerous, right? That's just asking to be in on the weekend, right? And I'm so paranoid, I'd never just deploy 2, right? I'm like, this has got to be like a raid stripe, N+1, right? So let's do 3, because if something happens to 1, then I'm in the middle of my kids' wrestling match, and you know number 2 is going to go down, right? Well, if I deploy it as an N+1 solution, maybe I have 3 or 33, who knows, right? Now at least I have a little bit of room. You know, first one goes down, the second one goes down. I know I got to really start hustling because the third one's going to go somewhere, right? So it allows us to kind of right-size our infrastructure, right? So you take that, I've got 10 for Office, 3 for my Visio. I only need 1 for Visio, right? And I probably only need 8 for Office, but I could take that 3-pack and throw it into the heap, right? So now I've got 13 for Office and Visio, or maybe I only need 9 overall, right? Because they're all coming from the same infrastructure. So it allows us to do what we need based on what the customer needs, not what IT needs to divvy out and separate, okay? And then the last thing, since I brought up Visio, is what we do around device-based licensing. So very, very important thing. We're all in IT, we're not legal experts, but we should be, right? One of the things that's important to understand is if your software, and Visio is one of those, that requires device-based licensing. And what is device-based licensing? Is it the Zen App server you have it installed on or the VDI machine you have it installed on? No, it is not. It is where the physical user sits and accesses that environment. So I travel, well, I used to travel a lot, not so much anymore, but let's just say at home I got a Mac, right? And I sit down, I do some work on my Mac, and then I go into the living room. I'm too lazy to carry my Mac with me. So I get on my Windows PC in the living room, continue doing my Visio stuff. I've now consumed 2 device licenses, right? I go over to my mother's, and who would want to carry your Mac over to your mother's when you just bought her a brand new Mac because you don't like her calling you for IT support? I go over to my mother's, and I work on her Mac. Now I'm up to 3. I go to the hotel and I do something, I'm up to 4, et cetera, et cetera. So as we start to look at this, we need to make sure that we have the tools in place to make sure we're doing the proper thing when it comes to licensing. And how do we report that, right? So FSLogix has their device-based licensing, which allows us to run a report and entitle users based on the device. Maybe you don't want Dave going to any Free Willy computer and doing Visio. Maybe you only want me doing it from my assigned Mac. Whether I'm at home or on the road, I need to take that with me. So it really changes what we're doing. And I think that is the last of that. I want to open up for questions. And if Stephanie will pass over the controls to Cassondra, we're actually going to dig deeper into what's going on here. And I'll let Joe ask any questions that may have came in at this time, and we'll go from there.
Okay, while Cassandra's getting ready, everybody, I hope, knows that XenApp 6.5 is approaching end of life. So the timing on this is pretty good for you to think about, what am I going to do as I now go to deploy XenApp 7. Whether you're going to go to 15 for LTSR or whichever version, what am I going to do for that? The timing on this is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, we're big easy button when it comes to applications. You're going to be amazed when you see Cassondra do one of these. I kid you not. It's 3 minutes or less, right? Now, I am, quote unquote, certified soft grid architect number 3. Tim Mangan and one of his guys got 1 and 2, but I took a class many, many years ago to do application virtualization. And albeit we all thought it was really cool at the time, and it was the coolest technology to solve a problem that we had at the time, it was difficult, right? Now, from a consultant perspective, I loved it. I'd go into companies, 4 hours per app all day long. You got 1,000 apps. It's going to be, 4,000 man hours. I'm going to charge you $125 an hour for the team. Boom, boom, boom. I was like, this is money, right? The reality of it was, it never achieved what we all wanted, that utopia of all applications virtualized, because it was just too difficult. So keep that in mind as you're starting to make this transition. Now is a good time to redo things in your infrastructure to make sure that you're able to meet the needs of your end user. So with that, I'm going to let Cassondra start talking. Joe, as the questions come in that are appropriate to what we're talking about, let's get them in there, okay?
Okay, there's one that just came in, if we can address this real quick. According to the documentation, the difference disk merge operations on REST is near instantaneous, so please ask about the performance recommendation.
So I believe what they're asking is when we log off and we merge that document, that diff disk, how much impact does that have, right? It's so little impact that I don't even worry about it. Ultimately, all the I/O that has taken place has already taken place, and that merge operation is going to be very, very, very insignificant compared to everything else. So if you've got some more advanced, you need more advanced information on scaling that, please reach out, hit our website, ask for a salesperson, contact you, and they'll get me engaged to help you analyze that. But it is so low that once you get into doing it, that's the least of your worries.
Awesome. Okay, let's see the demo.
Okay, great. So y'all should be seeing a few different desktops here. This is actually one server. I just use strict terminal services, and so I've got an admin up here at the front and then a couple of users. These users actually have identical user profiles, but they look a little different because I'm giving them different apps. So this user gets Chrome, this one doesn't. This user's licensed for Pro, and well, this one's not. And it's kind of cool to see what's going on because behind the scenes, because if you look underneath at where things are installed, you can see here's my Google Chrome folder. This user doesn't have Google Chrome in here, whereas if I go to the same location in this other user, oh, that's right, it's in x86, so sorry, Google. You'll see Chrome is here. It is not here. There's just nothing there. So there's nothing for the user to change permissions on. Instead of setting ACLs and DACLs, we have the application simply is not installed for this user. So there's no way for them to circumvent what we're doing here. There's no application for them to take control of. It's as if it was.
Cassandra, if
yes.
I was an auditor and I was going to come in and do an audit, and they assigned me a user account to do an audit on this machine, and let's just say it's called Auditor. If I wasn't a member of the group, I wouldn't see any applications, would I?
Exactly. So if that user is has that is part of this group or user that has the application hidden from them, then they could run all the queries that they want and they would not be able to find the application.
And that's why, for the audience, we're able to do really cool things for licensing for you. If you don't know, as soon as you put an application on the hard drive and it's visible to the user, you need to license it. Whether they use it or not, you need to license it. With us, because they can't see it anymore, it doesn't exist to them, you can have a lot stricter rules and not worry about getting hammered by somebody on an audit.
And we hide all portions of the application. You can look through here. It's not just the shortcuts on the desktop. It's everything that goes into installing this application. It's all the registry information as well. So you look at this and you probably have your jaw drop to the floor like, I don't know my applications well enough to find all these components. We've made that pretty easy for you. So let me show you just how easy it is to create a new rule set. Let's just say new rule. And let's pick something that will be interesting. So you can choose from a list of what else installed. Let's find what goes into well, there's Chrome. We were just looking at that. So we'll scan that. You can see we're looking at the application. We scanned a few locations. We have our new rule right here already. I can apply this. Let's go look and keep an eye out on what happens here if I make this disappear. Now I've hidden it from everybody on the machine. It's that fast to make this application go away. And it's not just whole applications that we can do. If you've got add-ins like toolbars and things that go into Word, we can do those quite easily as well. Have a look at what happens when I open IE. See the Google toolbar here? Now, let's see what happens when I hide the Google toolbar. Scan, apply, you're good to go. So we can treat each one of those add-ins, instead of having to package, Word with add-in A and Word with add-in B and a combination of Word with those add-ins. You don't have to worry about those applications that interact with each other. You can just scan each add-in individually and treat it as its own app, which makes management so much easier. You don't have to think about all the possible combinations and all the use cases that you need to cover. You just need to think about who needs this tool.
Cassondra, I don't mean to belittle you. You made this look like magic, right? And you've been doing this forever. And well, everybody that's talked to me knows what I call you around app masking, and it has to do with expert. How hard is it for an end user or an admin to learn this? I mean, I know when I came on board, you threw the manual at me and said, go do these 5 things. And within a couple weeks, I was up to speed and I felt good, right? Now, I like to think I'm extremely smart and I'm better than the average Joe, but I don't actually think I am. So can you talk a little bit about, what people need to think about as they go down this path?
It's not that difficult, but all you have to do is put the software on. I usually schedule about an hour for a new install, but you install the software, which takes 2 minutes, and then the rest of that is just, try an app. And most of the time, and I'd say this is a good 95% of the apps, it's as simple as what you just saw. It's scan and you're good to go. There are cases where we might not pick up a shortcut. If you're doing something custom with your shortcuts and that's not part of the install information that we're reading when we scan the app, you might have to come in and add a rule for that shortcut. You might have to look at applications that overlap with each other and, make sure that you're not hiding something as part of Adobe Pro when it's actually needed by Adobe Reader, that sort of thing. But it's not very difficult. We can hide a variety of things. We can hide files and directories, registry keys and values. We can hide printers, which is really important for things like Adobe or other things that have PDF writers associated. We can hide fonts, which is always fun. This is kind of pretty because if you've got one of those really expensive fonts that only certain users use, well, sometimes we'll pay for ourselves just right there because you can give the font to only the users who need it. Now that's just the hiding and the application masking part. When you're managing applications, you can also do redirection. So say you've got an application that puts something in a place that's common on the machine. Maybe it's not a user specific location, but it's data that you want to be user specific. So you can take stuff from HQ local machine and put it in HQ current user. You can take things in program data and put them in the user's profile, just so that you can make those applications that aren't multi-user aware suddenly keep things in the right place so that they can be multi-user aware.
You mean 10 years ago when I wrote these fancy scripts and tweaked, we'll call it tweaking, these applications that were single user aware, not multi-user aware, and made it all work, I wasn't doing it the best way possible?
I don't think anything was the best way possible 10 years ago, but no, this makes it really great because it's going to be a user-specific location. It's real time, so you're not having to copy things. You're not having to modify where the application thinks it's going. The application can still think it's writing to your program data location. It just happens to be looking at a different destination that's where you want to actually save the data.
Yeah, and this makes it just a big, easy button. As you're migrating applications into an environment and you run into these challenges, right, this is the easiest way. I had a customer about 9 months ago ran into us, and this is all they wanted. They had an application that wrote to C program data application config.ini, and it was unique for every user. And they were having to go down a path of VDI versus shared because of that. And we showed them this, and they were able to make, in seconds, the change so that they could support that application in a shared environment. So it's a big, easy button in regards to that to fix some of that legacy stuff that we have to have in our environments.
And it's useful for a lot of things too. Even if you're not worried about multi-user awareness, this can be used to manage where user data goes. There are a lot of folks that are used to using shell folders for their folder redirection, but you're locked into, oh, you know, I've got to do the whole shell folder. I can't pick and choose what I need to save. With this, you can do the individual file or the individual directory that you want, and you can still redirect things out to the network. You just pick and choose what you care to save. Gives you a lot more granularity.
Can I interject a couple of questions here?
Sure.
Okay. One question is there a way for an end user to circumvent FSLogix App Masking?
Great question. So the way that we apply these rules is we create them in a working directory over here. That's where I put all my rules. And you'll notice that they're pretty small files. These are, you know, 1, 2K, really small things going on over here. To apply them, I put them over here in my C program files FSLogix apps rules directory. So first of all, you're going to need to be an administrator to access this anyway. And then if you wanted to, you could use an FSLogix rule set to deny access to this folder to anyone except your FSLogix administrator. So even your administrators wouldn't be able to access it. But in order to circumvent this, you'd have to be able to come in here and remove this. So all you do is create a rule to hide the FSLogix rules from anyone who shouldn't be managing them. Once you have that in place, then they can't even see the folder. These rules apply to administrators, domain admins. You can make your assignments whatever makes sense to you, and there's no way for a user who's not given permission to something to grant themselves permission. Once the rule's in place, there's no way around it.
And so I want to highlight one comment on that for you real quick, Cassondra. You can't deny what you must allow. It's an old firewall term, right? So I had a customer that said, well, how can I secure that if I have to give my users administrative access to the machine? And I said, well, you get a different job, right? Because if you give away that level of access, you can't control what you must allow, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind. If a user gets to that level and you haven't done the proper things to secure your environment, it doesn't matter what tool you use, right? Not just us, any tool. So you need to make sure you're following some of those basic industry best practices to secure that machine so that they can't get to that particular folder.
And that brings us to another question. What would you do if you accidentally blocked all administrators, including yourself? I think at that point they're calling Cassondra.
Later. So
they might want to update the resume first. They call Cassondra, but yes, at that point they would be calling Cassondra. But there are ways to do this, right, Cassondra?
There are. In fact, I managed to apply a rule that blue screened my machine within about 30 minutes of working here. So you know, I've been there. It's easy. You boot into safe mode. Once you boot into safe mode, then we're not applying any rules, and you can go in and you can remove your rule and then give it the proper assignments. I have totally done that. I have had
but you were in a test environment learning, and I advise everybody do this in a tested environment. It's easy to learn. Do not do these things in production. You know, shame on you if you do that, or you'll have a very recently updated resume. You know, just make sure you're doing this in a proper test environment, validating what you have done works as desired, and then move it through your process.
And I'll admit, I have helped customers who had no other place to test except production, but we were very, very careful when it came to assignments. We made sure that you had one test user, and this sit up at the top, that's everyone. That was always no, and you only applied to the user or the very small test group that you wanted to. So you have to be very careful about that. But you certainly can be. I would never check this checkbox in a production environment because that applies to everybody on the machine. So there are things to be careful about.
Well, if you get paid by the support call, it's fun.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Any other questions, Joe?
Yeah, there actually are quite a few. So the first question about app masking is, can this be used with app layering, and how does it differ?
So I'll take that. Absolutely can be. Okay. We are a firm believer we just make app layering better. Okay. So as you start to look into your environment and all the different layers that you'd have to create, what we suggest you do is create a layer for like Office apps, right? Maybe that's Office, multiple versions, open Office, whatever free Office, whatever you have. Put all those into that layer, and then use FSLogix to divvy up access to the appropriate version. Okay, so if a user goes from Office 2012 to 2016 with FSLogix, that's literally an Active Directory change, right? I'm moving a user from one AD group to another. I don't have to do, I don't have to apply a new layer, any of that stuff. I'm just moving the user from one layer to the other. So we absolutely do work with that. It's a very good story together, simplifies your environment. If I can give advice to anybody on the call, the simpler your environment is, the better your uptime is going to be, okay? As environments get more complex, it introduces only one thing, downtime, right? And that downtime is not what we want. So simplify your environment as much as you can, utilizing tools appropriately so that you don't have an overly complex environment.
Good advice. Another question, all the rules are on the same server. How does it work for farms? Can you have a central store that all servers look at so that you don't need to duplicate your rules?
You certainly can. So the way we work is we apply the rules that are here, and we actually have a utility out there that will make it easy to get your rules here. You can set up a share and we'll have a scheduled task in place that just brings your rules down from that central location. It makes management so much easier because you always know that all of your machines are up to date and synced according to that schedule.
Awesome. Okay. Another question. I notice you're running this on Windows Server 2012 R2. Does this work with the Edge browser and or Win10 style modern apps?
So those, it can work with the Win10 style apps. I have not worked with the Edge browser very much, but Dave may have more experience there. It can work with the Win10 apps. They are not easy because you can't scan them, but you can build. I don't know if you noticed when we were building our rule sets, you can create a custom rule. Just start with a blank rule set and add the files, and those all go into a central folder on the machine. So you can build the rules for that, and I'd be glad to help you do that.
Okay. Another question is about licensing. Is it licensed per user, concurrent, named user? How does that work?
You can go either route. You can go per user, named, or concurrent. We tell you kind of look at how you license your environment. If you went with concurrent, generally that's the right answer to follow, but if you went with named, it's usually the right answer to follow. So just look at what you did with your environment and we can work with you either way on that.
Okay. Another question, when are the FSLogix rules read and applications hidden? So I think the question there is in terms of the logon sequence. How does that happen?
So the rules are read as soon as they hit this folder. So if you copy a rule in live in the middle of a user session, you can have that rule go live in the middle of the user session, assuming it's assigned to that user. There are a few caveats to that, like group assignments. The driver that implements all these rules starts at boot time, so it starts very early in the boot process. So if you've got your machines with the rules in place already, then the machine boots up and they are already in place before a user even logs in.
Okay, and another question. Do I really need FSLogix, or could I use something like group policy or app locker to control application access?
You know, there are a lot of people who've used group policy. There are some problems with that, though. Like I showed you before, the application doesn't exist for a user when it's masked with FSLogix. If you use group policy, it's actually setting permissions on the files. And so especially if you've got any admins around, they can go and take ownership of files, they can grant themselves access, and they can get around the group policy pretty easily. It also makes the files bigger, and so if you change there's nothing that will ever clear out the group policy. It just modifies the file and then it modifies again. So every time your group policy changes, the file gets a little bit bigger. So eventually you're losing a lot of space on your machines through group policy.
And the last thing I'll add to that, sorry, I was taking a drink of water. Be careful what group policy brings to you in an audit scenario. Make sure you know what they're going to respond with if the actual data shows up to the user. They can actually see it in a folder. How are they going to ask you to license that application?
Good point. I've been a fan of FSLogix for, I don't know, at least a few years now. I think that it's a really awesome technology. I think that you all are making some great strides forward in terms of solving problems. And I think now, Dave or Cassondra, do you have any advice for anyone that wants to start off a POC and take a look at this?
I do. Stephanie, if you'll pass the control back to me, I've got the most important slide of the day. It's how do you start this, right? So let me go ahead and hit show my screen. And apparently I've been walking around and have lost my mouse. There it is. Okay. So the most important part is if you want to test this, what do you need, right? You need a test machine. We need a file share. It could be a file share on that test machine. It doesn't matter to us, right? You need about 20 minutes to go through the config, okay? And that includes a couple IT stories by Dave, right? Pick a couple applications that you want to play with so you can start learning, and you're off and running. We give a fully non-encumbered, non-inhibited eval, okay, for 30 days that you can do anything you want with, right? You can test it with one user, you can test it with 1,000 users. It doesn't matter to us. And in order to get that eval key and license and software, just shoot us a note, go to our website, www.fslogix.com, and you'll see a link at the top of it for evaluations. Fill out the little form, and we'll get rolling with you. Generally, my customers, we schedule a 1-hour call, make sure that we have everything ready to go for proof of concept. They go in, they do their stuff, they do their testing. They come back to us usually within 3 to 4 weeks, ready to move forward with the purchase. They validate that the technology solves the problem that they're seeking to solve very, very quickly, okay? So that's all you need in order to get this done. I have done probably 200 configurations so far this year. So, you know, it's not hard to do. You know, just reach out to us and let's get somebody on the phone to help you get going. Do a little bit of education so that you can support it in your environment, and you'll be a very happy camper.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I know we're approaching the top of the hour. Stephanie, I think you want to tell them about where the recording will be and so forth, and then we'll close it out, and just want to say thank you to everyone for attending.
Yes, let me pull the screen back really quickly. All right. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Cassondra. It was a lot of great information, a lot of great questions today. So thank you, all the attendees. Thanks for asking such great questions. And thank you, Joe, for getting stay on top of those questions as they were coming in. I know that's always fun. So yeah, tomorrow around this time, you'll receive an email straight from GoToWebinar. It'll have a link to today's recording. It will also have some other links in there to a survey, which I've also put into the chat window for you if you'd like to go ahead and fill that out now. We love to get your feedback about each of our webinars. And finally, there's a link to a discussion thread in the CUGC forums. So if you do have more questions about what you heard today, or if we didn't get everything answered, feel free to take that discussion to the forums, and we'll make sure that Dave and Cassondra see those questions and get you some answers. And finally, for those of you who opted into for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, we will announce the winner after the webinar. You'll have to keep an eye on Twitter, watch hashtag MyCUGC, or follow us on Twitter at MyCUGC, and we'll announce it there and also in the discussion forums. So, and I think with that, we'll let you guys get back to your day. Just one other reminder, if you're not already registered with a local CUGC group, we'd love to have you come on out to a local meeting. If you go to mycugc.org, look for your city. We have so many groups around the world, so there's most likely one near you. Find your meeting, get registered, and keep it going. And I think that's it. So I see another couple questions have come in, but I will take those offline to Dave and Cassondra and get answers for you, and I'll post those answers in the forum thread for you guys. And with that, I just once again want to thank Dave and Cassondra and thank FSLogix for all their support of CUGC. And thank you, Joe, for helping out with the webinar. It's always great to have you on. And I will say goodbye. Everybody have a great day. Thanks.